Hello, everyone, and thank you for logging on today. I've got a nice presentation for you today where we're going to cover the BWD Undercar program. I think we probably have some categories that you weren't quite aware that we were in, and some good sales tips for you. So, first thing I'd like to do before we get going is go ahead. You know what? Hold on. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. The I do want to go over our training schedule for the year. So the obviously for those of you that are here, you know how to get here, and you can register and navigate that. But if there's some other topics that look interesting to you throughout the year, go ahead and you can scan this QR code right now. That'll bring you to the page where you can go ahead and register for any of the upcoming sessions that seem interesting to you. And then we're going to start covering AC as we start to get into the warmer months, and then some other really interesting ones as we cover things like advanced ice technology later in the summer. So as we get into this category, and I should say categories specifically, we've broken this down a couple different ways. First thing I want to talk about are some new customer opportunities that really exist because of the Undercar program. I'm going to go over some of the key categories within this program, how they fail, talk about some simple technical tips that are good for a counter person to know or an outside salesperson to know as you're talking to your professional customers. I want to review the competitive landscape within these categories. And then lastly, we're going to go over some of the sales support materials that are available to you to help you take some of this message to the street. So first thing I'd like to do here is go over really the whole program and why it exists and the categories within it. So, for those of you that know BWD, you know that we've been around for a long time and we've been making sensors and actuators for decades, right? Historically, it's been engine management, right? But the technology that exists now between sensors that are used maybe under the hood or under the car aren't that different. The same is true for actuators and solenoids. So we are strategically in the undercar categories that make sense for us, right? We're doing the things that we can do, that we're good at, that we have some engineering expertise and some manufacturing expertise. This is not something we're just into willy-nilly, right? When we look at this, we've really split it up into three main segments: drivetrain, brake and chassis, and tire and wheel. And we'll talk within this. I want to talk about really bring forward a few specific categories. That would be four-wheel drive actuators. We'll talk about that. Transmission control solenoids, parking brake actuators, which are a newer and category that's growing like crazy, and then ABS sensors. And that's really where I want to start is with ABS sensors because it's such a large category to begin with, and it's certainly not going away, regardless of how vehicles are powered, 10, 20, 30 years from now. So thinking about customer opportunities and some newer opportunities, and I think it's probably fair that your traditional customers today for BWD are going to be, traditional repair shops, general repair shops, and some fleets, right? We made some good inroads there in a lot of different categories. With the Undercar program, it allows us to talk to some other folks that may be not super familiar or maybe not be buying BWD every day or every week from you. And that would be transmission specialty shops, right? People that, are still rebuilding or fixing transmissions, not just installing new ones and reman ones. Collision centers. And then lastly, the undercar specialists and the tire shops, right? Because we have a few categories here that really lend themselves well to those types of businesses. So having a program like this can certainly open up some doors for you and for us. Uh, Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the importance of quality sensors that perform correctly. And we'll start with ABS sensors. And on modern vehicles, they certainly do much more than just help a vehicle stop sooner and safely, because these are integrated into the vehicle's electronic stability control system, right? This is how the ECU is getting information on how quickly every corner, each wheel is rotating. Now, it's looking at all that data and it's bouncing that up against the data it's getting in real time from the vehicle speed sensor. So the ECU sees the information that's coming from the vehicle speed sensor as the absolute and most correct, right? That's the benchmark. And it knows that if that's the speed of the vehicle, all of the wheels should be rotating at a specific speed, assuming you're going straight. Um, Now, overlay that in with some of the other information the ECU gets, and that's what the driver is doing. And it's going to get that information from the accelerator pedal position sensor as well as the steering angle sensor. And it's going to take all that data very quickly in real time and make decisions about when the electronic stability control system should engage to help keep the vehicle straight or keep the driver in control. An example might be the driver hits an exit ramp too quickly, right? He starts to get a lot of body roll. The yaw rate sensor picks that up. Driver starts to, quickly eases out of the gas, starts turning the wheel more and more and more. Vehicle knows how fast it's going, what your inputs are, how fast each particular wheel is rotating. The vehicle might say, okay, we got a problem here. We need to help this vehicle rotate a little bit better. So it's going to grab the brakes, the inside wheels, slow it down, let the vehicle turn and get it back under control. It might do the same thing if you're on the highway and you swerve to miss a box that falls out of a truck in front of you, right? But all this time, the vehicle's making it's sometimes very extreme real-time decisions based on the data it's getting in real time from the sensors. So the sensors on the vehicle they must be a few different things. They must be accurate, right? They must be fast. There can be no delays, all digital signal processing, and they need to be durable. They need to be able to perform in harsh conditions, extreme weather, extreme heat, extreme cold, so that the electronic stability control system and all of the other electronic safety systems can operate as designed. And this is the criteria that we use when we are designing and manufacturing sensors. Specifically, these are some of the things that we do within our ABS sensors to make sure that they're accurate, that they're fast, and that they're durable. There's and this is how we do it, right? This proves it, right? Things like brass inserts for durability, high strength synthetic materials, and then in some things we do to just make it easier for the technician to install, like the grommets and clips they're already installed, right? These are the types of things you get with the BWD ABS sensor program. There, also want to talk a little bit about how the technology for ABS sensors has evolved in the last few years. The sensor you see on the left is an older, very, very typical Hall effect sensor. These, they use really simple technology, right? It's looking at the basically as the wheel's rotating, measuring how fast that's going, getting it to the ECU. That's it. It's able to do one thing, right? Measure the speed of the wheel. That's it. Modern vehicles, and today we'll talk about Toyotas, also want information, not just how fast the wheel is rotating, but they need to know which direction the wheel is rotating. It needs to know that for systems like hill hold assist, right? And automated braking. So the same kind of sensor can't work. A Hall effect sensor can't do that unless maybe you put two on a vehicle. But that's not what the OEs have done. They've put more advanced, more active sensors on vehicles. This is theirs, what it looks like on the inside, and this is ours. Totally different. The real danger here is with theirs, when it's installed, it works well enough that the light doesn't come on. Right? It doesn't cause a drivability issue. So a shop can put this on and it'll work. Uh, but the problem here is that when you get into an emergency situation or when you're on a hill, the system isn't smart enough to know which way that wheel is rotating. And that can certainly cause problems. That's why ours are very, very different. And it's why we benchmark ours against the performance of the OE to make sure that it works exactly the way Toyota intended it to do in every driving situation. The ABS sensors are a category where, in terms of function and performance, you can't you can make it more durable, but you can't really make it better than the OE. Um, but unfortunately, what some folks have done is made it less than the OE, right? And that's where it can get dicey and put somebody at risk. The Another place where we're good in ABS sensors, quite frankly, is coverage, right? So you'll see that we do have more SKUs than everybody else, but it's also really smart coverage. We have a dedicated product manager, right, to this line, because it's a very important line to us. So we have smart coverage, and we don't have the duplication that some other folks have, where they quickly add numbers, they end up with five numbers, but they end up actually all being the same. But they were doing it quick, didn't do adequate research. We're smart about that. We've also tried to be very smart and very pointed about being able to offer coverage for all four corners. We know that most folks aren't replacing four at a time, but a lot of your better shops are replacing two at a time. They're replacing the fronts at the same time or the rears at the same time. We can talk a little bit more about that later towards the end of the presentation. But definitely an area where we're growing. Now, I want to talk about these 8 numbers. If you're familiar with the program, you're probably stocking it. You're probably doing all right with it, right? Because this is a pretty big category. These numbers are not the 8 best numbers. You already have the 8 best numbers for your market on your shelf. But what these are the 8 numbers that have been recently released, meaning 2023-ish, that are starting to see very, very, very strong sales out, right? The people are buying them. They're putting them on vehicles. So what these numbers are, and you can see most of them fit late model stuff. These are the numbers that are going to be your A movers in 5 years, right? No question. So please take a picture of this. Some of you probably have some of these numbers on your shelf already, but if you don't, I would strongly recommend. We're seeing sales on these everywhere, right? It's not limited to a particular geographic region. Really wise to at least get on board with these numbers, so you're not missing sales in the future, and you can really get the full benefit of what these SKUs are going to do. Really quick tip, when you're selling one of these, especially to a walk-in customer, and especially if they're only going to buy one, please make sure that they clean where this ABS sensor is going, so it's going on a smooth surface, and they get rid of any rust or corrosion that would change how high or where that ABS sensor sits once it's installed. If that air gap starts to be different from one side to the next, you can get inconsistencies in performance. It becomes less accurate and it can affect ABS and electronic stability control. You know, I'm sure you guys sell some kind of penetrating spray or a rust removal spray. This is a really good add-on with an ABS sensor to just make sure that surface is clean before it's installed. And with each of the few categories that we're going to go over today, we'll talk about that. Testing, big deal to us. We have our own factories where we're doing lab testing in the factories all the time. In addition to that, we also have a testing center in Texas where we're doing on-vehicle testing to make sure these actually perform in the real world and correctly integrate with the electronic safety systems that are found on vehicles. I've got a couple questions that popped up, and before we go to the next section, I just want to. Okay, audio issues, but it's fixed now, so that's good to know. All right, so parking brake actuators. This is a category. It's growing like crazy. Relatively new category. They were not on a lot of vehicles, going back around 2010. Then all of a sudden they started being put on almost everything. If we go back in time to a snapshot 2015, they were on about 30 million vehicles. Okay, so what that means today is there's about 30 million 10-year-old vehicles with parking brake actuators. And in the aftermarket, that's sort of our sweet spot for a category like this. And when I say that, that's a North American figure, right? Sorry, I don't have these specifically for Canada, but so we're dealing with 10% ish of the addressable market, not that big. But we also know that 10 years from now, there's going to be 155 million vehicles on the road with parking brake actuators. Right? It's pretty simple math because everything built in the last 10 years has had them. So the opportunities for this are really going to grow, and especially because of where these sit on the vehicle, right? We're very, very optimistic about growth in this category, especially just based on what we've seen already with it being in the game for a few years. Now, these have really made the older cable style parking brakes completely obsolete, right? These are two little electronic actuators that are generally bolted onto the rear caliper. Vehicles have two of them. Sometimes they're side specific. Sometimes it's the same part number that'll fit the left and right. But either way, there's two on everything. A lot of times they're activated automatically. And if you park on a hill, you can hear that little noise of them engaging and then disengaging as you put the vehicle in drive. You can also apply it yourself, just by pressing the button, right? That little button with the P on it. So it is on almost everything. And on a lot of vehicles, they're more important than people realize because they don't just help your car stay stopped, right? In a lot of vehicles, including a lot of GM stuff, they actually help the vehicle stop in reverse, right? When you're going backwards, your back brakes are then your front brakes, and they give you additional stopping power in emergency situations. So these are tied to your reverse sensing and automated braking. So they are, like I said, many vehicles, they're incorporated into that system already. Really important that these integrate correctly and work exactly as the OE intended them to. With ours, we're like everything, we're going to do all the little things to make sure that they are correct. They're tested to make sure they integrate correct. And then on most applications, not all, but the vast majority, especially where it was determined that it's required, we include new O-ring and new fasteners in the box to make it a faster, simpler installation. This is a category that we got into a while ago, right? We've been into this for 4 or 5 years now, and we've been able to add the numbers that we see that are growing that we need to have coverage for. We've been able to build this out to a program now where we're around 54 numbers. It gives us coverage for most vehicles with electronic parking brake actuators. The rest of the world is still a little behind us in this category right now, and I think puts us in a really good position to be your partner and to grow this category. If you're not in this game right now, and I suspect a lot of you in your stores might not be because it's so new. You don't need 54 numbers. You really don't. But you probably need these four. These four are a pretty big percentage of sales. We see that they have the highest failure rates. Not going to get into specific details on why on each one. So take a picture of this. Now, the nice thing about all four of these is all of them cover both sides, right? So I think that's a big reason why these are some of the more popular numbers as well. But if you want to get in the game, these are the four numbers to have. And just a quick tech tip, something that you can talk to your customers about, recommend, especially if it's a walk-in. It'll be interesting to see how much DIY business the world ends up getting on parking brake actuators. So far, we've seen a little more than what we anticipated, but folks need to know that most vehicles need to be calibrated, right? Once it's put on. So if somebody doesn't know that or understand that, could maybe end up with a customer who's not super happy, thinks there's something wrong with the part. There's not. Just remind folks that, if you're going to put this on, just check the service information, figure out what's required from a calibration standpoint to make sure that the whole process goes smoothly. Four-wheel drive actuators. Again, growing category, maybe not quite growing like parking brake actuators, but it's in a much bigger place today. But it's continuing to grow simply because there are more four-wheel drive vehicles on the road than there ever have been, right? It's become a pretty big share of vehicles. And I think the important thing to remember is that you can kind of forget electrical vehicles for a moment, but even hybrids, like some of the Toyota applications, hybrid vehicles still have four-wheel drive actuators. So as technology goes on, even if we get into a place where hybrids become a bigger percentage of truck and SUV sales, this category is not going anywhere, at least for a long, long, long time. And there's, I just want to talk for just a minute for how these fail. I think, obviously for where these are, right underneath the vehicle, they're certainly susceptible to salt, corrosion, all that good stuff that we like if we're selling undercar parts, electrical issues. But I think the big thing that we also see is how much they fail from just lack of use, right? So don't be surprised if somebody needs one and they say, well, I can't believe I need one. I haven't even driven the truck in 8 months. Or that's probably why. Or I've drove the truck, but have you engaged four-wheel drive? Is it, maybe not, right? Over time, those can seize up. And in extreme heat, right? Like any electrical part, extreme heat can certainly cause a failure at some point. With ours, tested and validated, we really need to make sure that it works seamlessly, correctly with the vehicle's four-wheel drive system. This particular application here, a popular one, also includes all new fasteners with the gasket already in the box, so somebody can buy it. Everything they need is right there for a pretty quick and seamless installation. And again, this is a place where our coverage is pretty good. Nobody else can really touch us. 36 numbers. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it gives us pretty deep coverage in terms of vehicles in operation, and specifically, pretty high coverage rate of vehicles that are equipped with four-wheel drive actuators. We could almost give a whole presentation on the evolution or technology of four-wheel drive actuators, because it seems like every decade they get completely redesigned and they become less mechanical and more electronic over time. It's wild that these are even still called the same thing as much as they've evolved. But the fact remains that they're a component, has moving parts, it's underneath a vehicle, no matter what they look like or what it fits or how many vehicles they fit. Eventually, a lot of them fail. So, I'm guessing some of you you're probably already in this business already, based on where you folks are. But, if you're not, these would be the numbers that we would recommend starting with, that are going to give you a lot of coverage, really high VIO, and represent pretty good percentage of sales. Super important tech tip, especially, over the counter, dealing with a do-it-yourselfer. Please remind them to say, look, when you take it out of the box, the last thing you do is plug it in. Attach it to the vehicle, then plug it in. If you plug it in first, it can overextend, it can seize up, right? Big deal, simple thing. Obviously, your professional customers probably know this, but really nice thing to remind your walk-in customers. Last category we want to spend some time with today are transmission control solenoids. And, there's sort of a theme here, right? And I think the theme is categories that are growing. This is growing because vehicles don't just have 3 and 4 speed transmissions anymore. They have 7 speeds, 8 speed, 10 speeds. That means they have more solenoids, right? So there's going to be big opportunities for this moving forward and into the future. I want to just quickly illustrate how these things actually work so you can get your head around this. Now, some of you may already know this, so forgive me if you don't, but if it's a part you've heard of but aren't quite sure how they work, they're oil-controlled solenoids, not entirely different from a VVT solenoid, but they really work like switches, right? So as that oil moves through, it's going to control it and turn them on or off, and that's what's going to shift gears in the transmission. So really simple, older GM transmission, been on a ton of vehicles. When that truck or whatever it's on is in first gear, what that really means is that both solenoids are on. To make the shift to second, one of them turns off. So one of them is just going to move. So at any time when you're changing gears, you're only activating one, right? So you're in second gear, one's on, one's off. You go to third gear, both off. That's the one switch that happens to take the vehicle from second gear to third gear. Now from third to fourth, that first one just turns back on. So it's just changing slightly a series of combinations. But you can see, as you drive, if you're on a commute, especially in stop and go traffic, how many times these things are going to move, right? In a normal commute, it's a lot, right? And that leads to failure. Can be electrical failure. Other thing that happens, like a lot of parts that depend on oil for performance, is sludged up mechanical sticking, right? That's certainly part of it. Sometimes the seals around them can fail, right? And they end up just causing a major leak. And in that case, if you need to get in there, or someone needs to go in there and dig around and get a new one on, or fix the seal, it certainly makes sense to install a new one with a fresh seal at that point, especially on a higher mileage vehicle. With ours, a lot of little things we do to make sure that they work correctly. We put the O-rings already on it, so it's easy to install. Stainless steel filter screen. It's not going to be plastic. It's not going to get hot and deteriorate. It's not going to start peeling off and then stick inside the solenoid and slow down the switching performance. 100% copper windings, right? So they're going to work correctly. Again, this is not that different than a VVT solenoid for us. Coverage here, again, pretty good. I think I didn't even realize we had 261 numbers as until I started building this out. Right, it's become a pretty major category for us, and most of the aftermarket is still a little bit behind us in this category. The Again, this is probably a category you're in, you're having some success with. Some of the numbers that are still selling really well are older numbers. They fit a ton of vehicles, right? Pretty simple technology on these. Uh, but I would just, take a picture of this. If you don't have all four of these numbers, probably a pretty good idea too, because folks are selling these for sure. Just a quick tech tip to recommend to your customers. I would think most people buying these are professionals, right? And they probably know this, but because this is a tough thing to do without the scan tool. But just, there's something called the transmission adaptive learning. It's where it learns how you drive and starts to change the shift points to work better for you. That needs to be reset when a new part is put in. When you take away a part that has 200,000 kilometers on it and you put in a new one, and that new part's going to function much faster. So if that adaptive learning is not cleared, you can have some really rough shifts. And we don't want that, right? Because we don't need someone spending a lot of money to have this part installed, because in some cases there's a lot of labor in these, and then the vehicle is shifting really harsh, right? They're going to blame the part, and right, that's not the issue. So we need to reset that adaptive learning. As we're talking about customer communication, reminding people of things, there are a few undercar categories that folks are recommending in pairs, and the reasons can be a little different depending on the category. Like I talked a little bit about with ABS sensors, with two of them, you always want that air gap to be exactly the same so that they can be accurate. The other thing that's important is the magnetic strength that's in the sensor. You want that to be pretty close or exact. But if you have one sensor that's brand new and another sensor that's 10 or 15 years old, they're not going to necessarily have the same magnetic strength. And that's, a very good reason why somebody would opt to replacing a set in pairs, right? For a front set or a rear set. We haven't talked about ride height sensors much today, but it is a category that we're in. I don't know if everybody knows it. It's not something that people necessarily need to go back to the dealership for. But what we do see a lot, especially at the dealership level, are people replacing them in pairs because they're subjected to the exact same conditions, same roads, same amount of salt, and certainly if one has failed, another one can certainly fail quickly. Parking brake actuators, again, this is another one because every vehicle has two, and when they're applied at the same time, right? They're always working in unison. And if one is 10, 15 years old, similarly, we need to make sure that they have matched performance, that they're working exactly the same way. And then lastly, transmission control solenoids. This is going to vary a little bit, I think, based on how easy they are to get to or not. So few transmissions, these are really easy to get to. And I think in most cases, people will opt to just replace the failed one. But there's some other transmissions where these are really hard to get to. And it's several hours book time to replace them. The math starts to change a little bit on this one, right? Because if somebody's working on a vehicle that has some age, has some kilometers on it, and they're dealing with, they're looking at 3-4 hours labor. This is a situation where it makes sense to change certainly more than one, especially when you think about the root cause of failure on these, right? It's heat and electrical issues, and or it's an oil sludge issue because never changed the transmission fluid. Uh, doesn't necessarily putting one in may not solve the problem for very long on these vehicles. So, to help you when you're out in the street and talking to folks, we've got some existing materials, and then we have some other materials that are in the works that will be available to you very, very soon. We have some detailed ABS sensor support material. It's been a big category for us for a long time. We also have new item spotlights and up and coming flyers that kind of remind folks which numbers we really recommend are being stocked at the store level. We're also very close to releasing a detailed 6-page brochure on the Undercar program itself. Hopefully, you're familiar with the YouTube channel. Have over 500 technical and installation videos on that. That's a good resource. We're also very close to launching an updated 22-page product portfolio on the Undercar program that really goes into some more detailed technical information than what we went over today on these categories. So, really to bring this home, right? The sensors that are in the BWD box are accurate, they're fast, and they're durable. That's what they have to be to make it inside the box. Our parts are tested in the lab and on vehicles, and they're not just tested for fit. They're tested for performance and integration with electronic safety systems. Coverage is good, right? Leading coverage, aftermarket exclusive coverage, late model stuff. And we want to give you guys the right information on the parts that we've released in the last couple of years so we can make good stocking recommendations. And lastly, we certainly try to do training events like this and create marketing support materials to help round out the program, to bring value to you, really to help you do your job and make it easier to sell parts and make your customers happier and reduce certainly any unnecessary or unwanted comebacks. So yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, and just see if there's any questions.